behaving according to your emotions. That is the origin of beating children. Whatever you are trying to get out of your child by hitting them, you find less violent ways to get it out of the child. What effects does hitting your child have? And I've not been in a position of a father that beats his child, but I've been in a position of a child that's beaten by his parents. And from that experience, as we would all agree, there are different things that happens. One, you get scared of your parents. Is it okay to beat people's children for them? Children who are beaten at home, who are beating, the manner of some people beat their children for correction purposes. He did this thing wrong. We want to make sure he doesn't do it again, so we discipline him mildly. But there are also children who, I don't know the state of their parents or how they are struggling with life. There are children who are not necessarily disciplined at home, but they are bullied at home by their own parents. What's going on, people? It's your man Coke Boy. This is the Good Living Podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today, we're talking about beating children. But before we go anywhere, this episode is sponsored by Aura Nigeria, where you get your nice fitting female corporate wears for your offices and for just to look elegant and look classy. Their link is in the description. Please do well to contact them. Today's episode is on beating children, so smacking kids, and it is a predominant thing in Africa for us to smack our kids, and all of us were beaten. You were touched. Parents to put hands on me, but anyway, we move. Now we're trying to dissect the issue and see just how good or bad that method that method of raising children really is. Now, what is the origin really of beating children? If you really think about it, what is the origin? Who said it was okay? How did it start? And that's a question I'm going to pose to you in the audience. You can type it in the comments right now. If I was going to think about where it came from, I would say it is impulse. It is impulse. It is behaving according to your emotions. That is the origin of beating children, because children often annoy you or offend you before you put hands on them. And it is the most primal, animalistic, or barbaric way to do things. This is not saying that it is negative. I'm just saying naturally you are acting based on your instinct and emotions directly. That is why you hit children. Because if an animal is hungry, it eats. If it's pressed, it shits. And if you are angry at a child, you smack him. You understand? That is a primal behavior. But intelligence expects that we think a little bit more. And so that whatever you are trying to get out of your child by hitting them, you find less violent ways to get it out of the child. And this leads me to ask the question, what effects does hitting your child have on your child, on you, on your family, on everything? And I've not been in a position of a father that beats his child, but I've been in a position of a child that's been beaten by his parents. And from that experience, as we would all agree, there are different things that happens. One, you get scared of your parents. So you get scared of beating. Early on, when it starts to happen, right? You get scared of the violence and the beating. And secondly, as time goes on, you get used to it if it is done often enough. And the motive of beating for any African parent that is hitting their child is to correct a behavior that they do not like. And if you're going to correct that behavior with beating, then the child should know that it is because of this behavior that you are beating them. So as barbaric as the beating might be, it's the same thing as your cat or your dog at home. When they defecate where they're not supposed to defecate, you take them there and slap them. Let them know that it is there that they offended. The same thing with children, It is because you did this, that's why I'm beating you. Or why did you do that? Kneel down here. Bring your hand. Another thing to look at is if you actually want to beat your child, when do you start? When is it too early to hit children? To hit a child? Because personally, my opinion is that I don't think we as a civilization in Africa, in Nigeria, are at a place where we can safely ban the hitting of children and have a good society. I feel like in more advanced countries, they have room for saying, you know what, don't lay your hands on anybody, whether it's your child or anybody, don't lay your hands, it's against the law. In other countries, they have the room for that. But in this country, we are not developed enough, we are not exposed enough or wise enough even to have a law like that, or to have it be illegal for somebody to hit their children. Because in a country where the orientation industry, the educational sector, and the people that are supposed to give awareness or to help children grow, aside the parents, are not really doing a great job. If you're not a Christian, you're sending your child to the church to listen to sermons or to the mosque, listen to scriptures or whatever, they might not learn something good unless it's the one that you tell them. So when we are lacking that in our society, there has to be radical forms of discipline and correction. And that is why I will still endorse some level of discipline, physical touch on children. But how early is it? Well, for me, I don't know about physical. I wouldn't say I can't give a physical age because people are different at different ages. But I believe there should be a threat, if not immediate violence or the action of it. There should at least be a threat of violence to a child, from a parent to a child, in terms of their upbringing, when they are able to make decisions. So when this child is able to decide between A or B, you should begin to use violence. This thing is sounding it's sounding very messed up. Like I'm advocating the hitting of children, but not necessarily. At the level where a child is able to make mistakes, there are different ways you can guide them to make decisions and to make the right decisions. Being that you're an adult and you're their parent and you know what is best for them. So with the threat of violence, not necessarily hitting them yet, but say I'll beat you, I'll run you into the wall, I'll do this, I don't know, whatever. No, it might not be too extreme, but whatever threat of violence you put to your young children to make them scared and not to make the wrong choices. You can start doing that as early as you have them making choices, and then slowly dilute it into love, lovely advice or love-filled advice and encouragement. Because I believe when you respect a child, they respect themselves. Sometimes you have to help people see their own self-image. Some people don't know the value that they have or what they are worth exactly until somebody else lets them or treats them in a way that allows them to see their worth. And it happens a lot of times, both in relationships and otherwise. Something else that I think is a myth is picking a blessing. Every child is a blessing. We've seen evidence countless times that it is not, unless the child becomes a blessing. Because some children are literally born, and from the day they are born until the day they die, their parents outlive them. Oh, till the day they die is problem, left, right, and center. So not every child is a blessing. Not every unborn child is an automatic blessing. Some children are bundles of grief from the day they are born till the day they die. And so some children actually do need beating. But I think also the upbringing and the parenting style that the parents use to raise a child affects deeply their outcome. Even if you give birth to a psychopath, the way you manage him will affect how he behaves in his adulthood. You get there are people who are terrible people, but they cannot behave anyhow under their parents' roof or when they're in their parents' house. It's when you just give them small opportunity to go outside, they go and misbehave because there is discipline in the house. But there's something somewhere that the parents did wrong and they could not translate that discipline to the innermost part of the child, let him behave himself when he's outside. So with these children now, at the earlier stage, you can actually use violence, but not physically beating them, but scare them with it. And then as they grow older, like I said, the maturity level in a child, he sees the maturity in himself if you see the maturity in him first. So if you stop using hand and say, you are old enough, even at 10, 11, you can start talking to your child like that. You're old enough for me not to be using this thing. You should know this thing, you should know this thing. The way you talk to your children, then you make them understand you and where you're coming from for their sake. A child with sense should be able to adjust their ways with daddy in mind or with mommy in mind when they're making decisions. You know, there are children who are not beaten, but they know that they don't want to disappoint their parents, so they will not do certain things. Those are people that were raised right, and it doesn't have to be with violence. So another topic that might come about is beating other people's children. Is it okay to beat people's children for them? In school, if the school doesn't have any policy against flogging or beating, then to some degree you can use a small amount of beating to correct children in school because it's allowed by the system. But if you're a normal person in the road or in the street and you see somebody else's child, there are different factors to think about. One, do you know the parents of this child? Would they give you permission to hit this child if they were here? The thing that the child has done, does it directly affect you? For example, if I catch someone else's child trying to steal in my house and I catch them red-handed, they can collect some beating from me. I want to touch them small first before their parents come. Because I don't know what their parents might negotiate with me, and I'll have to understand. Because at the end of the day, that's their parent. They might say, okay, what do you steal? Good. We'll give you 10 good. Don't touch my child. And you know that you will not have full satisfaction if you do not put hands on that thief. For that to happen, you have to, that way you can beat someone. But seeing two people fighting, there's this thing where, and it's because the world has, I would say, spoiled, in my opinion. That is why we cannot do this anymore. Before, other people's children could put hands on us, other people's parents could put hands on us. But now, everybody's life is more individualistic now. Everybody's family is more in their own small cell. So nobody wants to have that wahala. If I beat my neighbor's kids now, it's going to be a problem. But I know that when I was little, even in this kind of setting, if my neighbor beats me, my father will ask me, what did you do? You get, but now they will ask you, why did you beat my child? And so I'm giving this advice not based on what is correct, but based on what will guarantee your safety in these current times that we are in. But I believe that it's correct if you can form a community within yourself and make it okay. Like with my siblings, for example, if we have children, I expect that my brother or my sister should be able to discipline my child when I'm not around, and I too theirs when they are not around. But if it's not somebody that's as close to you as that, you might want to avoid the situation unless it in fact it impacts you or directly affects you, like stealing your stuff, for example. That's one thing about beating people's children. Now, beating also, there's a different way I believe to handle the male child and the female child. I believe for the male child, it is easier for you to use violence on the male child, but you should stop early because men get used to violence easily. And if you beat a child consistently until they are early teens and adulthood, they're already used to it. It's women that even if you give them violence, when you still do hand like this, they will still shake a little bit because generally I think they are slightly weaker. They are weaker vessels than the male than the average man. And so I believe women, the threat of violence should always linger if you're a man raising your daughter, if you're a woman raising your daughter, if you're raising your daughters, the threat of violence should always linger, more so than it should linger in the mind of your son. Your son should be sure that you wouldn't hit him at to a certain degree, or you might shock him sometimes when he's misbehaving. But you should be sure that you can't hit him. But your daughter shouldn't ever be sure that you can never hit her because she has most, it's always good to have that option on that side because it's possible to have it. There's one effect of beating children, or actually that I can pinpoint, and that is how you relate to bullying. Children who are beaten at home, who are the manner of some people beat their children for correction purposes. He did this thing wrong. We want to make sure he doesn't do it again, so we discipline him mildly. But there are also children who I don't know the state of their parents or how they are struggling with life. There are children who are not necessarily disciplined at home, but they are bullied at home by their own parents, and it's not going to look like it's coming from a correctional standpoint. It's looking like it's coming from an oppressional standpoint. And when the child sees oppression in that manner, they would want to reciprocate and copy it with the weaker person they find, because at home they are weaker than their father, they're weaker than their mother, and if they get bullied, there's nothing they can do about it. But in school, they can find the small guy to pick on because that's what they learn from home. And several bullies are being beaten at home, are being somehow somewhat bullied at home. There are some who are not, but a lot of them are. So that is one way that hitting your children can actually turn into something else. But overall, you should have some authority, physical authority over your child to hit them. To even the Bible says, "Spare the rod and spoil the child." I also want to say that a lot of things in the Bible that we take literally are actually meant for us figuratively. So spare the rod and spoil the child doesn't necessarily mean you should use iron to flog your child when they do wrong, and if you do not use the iron to flog your child when they do wrong, then they will go astray. It could simply mean do not fail to correct your child when you see them do something wrong, because it will spoil the child in that manner. If you're not teaching them the right way to go and you see them doing something wrong and you do not correct them with a strong hand or a strong voice, leading them toward the right direction, you'll be spoiling the child. So it's not necessarily beating. It is just the rod is correction, either with love or with, it's just correction in any shape or form. And that is just what it is. So have that idea on your child. Have that power over your offspring. And I think you will raise better people if you pay attention to it. Thank you very much for watching and listening to this episode. This is the Good Living Podcast. Don't forget, Aura Nigeria is the sponsor of this video. Sweet feminine corporate wears for your offices, for your outings, for your dates, and the likes. Order them today and they will deliver for you. See you on the next episode, and ciao.